Hello and welcome back. My name is Danny Richter, CCL's Vice President of Government Affairs, and it is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce Dr. Adele Morris. I've had the great pleasure of seeing Adele speak many times in the 8 years I've been in DC, as well as having the opportunity to seek her direct expert counsel in my work with CCL. She is always direct, often quite funny, and always compelling in her deep knowledge on carbon pricing, rich policy-making experience, and clear passion for her work. She is currently the Joseph A. Pechman Senior Fellow in Economic Studies and the Policy Director for Climate and Energy Economics at the Brookings Institution. While she has many examples in her career of being right in the thick of it, I will just share a couple, including her being the lead natural resource economist for the U.S. Treasury Department for 9 years, prior to which she served as the senior economist for environmental affairs at the President's Council of Economic Advisors during the development of the Kyoto Protocol. So Adele, welcome. We're very excited to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Danny, and thank you, CCL volunteers, for all your wonderful work. You guys are the best. I'm a huge fan, and this is the first time I've ever spoken at an event where I can see little heart bubbles going up on the screen while I'm talking. So trust me, that's never happened. So this is great. Thank you so much. So I know you guys probably heard Jerry Taylor's talk at the very beginning of the sessions today, where he talked about how there needs to be this big shift amongst Republicans for us to make progress on climate change. I'm going to talk about another impediment, and it's a little different, but I think it's significant and it's something for us to think about. And that is the Biden administration and its virtual total silence on carbon pricing. And I've heard several things, they want to focus on the power sector first, or, he's made major commitments to reduce emissions. For example, our new Paris Agreement, nationally determined contribution, is 50 to 52% below 2005 greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Oh my gosh, that's huge. And he wants to decarbonize the power sector by 2035 totally, and then the US economy hit net zero no later than 2050. So these are major goals. And then the question arises how we're going to get there, right? And he doesn't talk about carbon pricing. If you Google carbon fee on the website of the White House, you will get nothing. If you Google greenhouse gas tax or anything like that, you will get nothing. If you Google carbon pricing, you get a reference to what other leaders were talking about at the climate summit on Earth Day. So, okay, what gives? And there's at least 3 things I've heard about that I want to share with you today. The first one is that during the campaign, President Biden promised to not raise taxes on anybody who earns more than $400,000 a year. Okay, that was his tax pledge. And I have a few thoughts about that. First of all, as you guys well know, a well-designed carbon fee and dividend program leaves the vast majority of American households better off financially than before the fee and dividend was established, right? And maybe that doesn't mean that every single household earning less than $400,000 has no net burden, but really, do we care more about people earning $300,000 than we do about achieving the climate goals? One pledge is going to give. Which is it going to be? The tax pledge or our commitment to the Earth's future? So I would just say that. And also, I want to say, and this is maybe a little pedantic, but he's already said he's going to raise taxes on corporate income. Well, what does that mean? Well, corporate income taxes, a lot of people think, we're just taxing this kind of nebulous entity that's a corporation and whatever. But really, a corporation is its shareholders and its workers. And we know from the economic literature that when you raise corporate income taxes, that's going to be borne by somebody. It's either going to be your or my 401k and the stock funds that are in it, or it's going to be workers who work for the corporation. Now, some of those people earn more than 400k, but a lot of them don't. So if we're really going to be a stickler about not raising taxes on people who earn less than 400k, then I don't think the corporate income tax increase would qualify. Now, I'm not saying, to be super clear, that he shouldn't raise corporate income taxes. I actually think that's a pretty good idea. But I'm saying that he's not violating that pledge with a carbon fee and dividend any more than he is with his other proposals that he's already announced. So, I don't think we need to view those pledges as super sacrosanct. Okay, so I'm not convinced about that. Well, what are the other reasons they might hold off? And, all of these kind of are some flavor of politics. So I totally get it's overall picture, it's the politics. But this next one, I think there's a legitimate action item. And that is the concern by some environmental justice organizations, not all. We know from today's discussion that some environmental justice organizations do support carbon pricing, but some don't. And so let's dig into that a little bit. What I'm hearing, and I'm not going to presume to speak or generalize, but there is a concern, and I think it's totally legitimate, that climate change gets a ton of attention. And right now, there has not been equivalent attention to the terrible air pollution and other environmental problems that face low-income communities and communities of color in the here and now. So there's not a parallel initiative around the needs of these communities. And so we're going to have to take a page, I think, from what happened in California. So they were trying to expand AB 32, which is their greenhouse gas program. And they came up against this challenge of the opposition from some people in the environmental justice community. And so what they ended up doing after quite a lot of debate and a certain amount of difficulty is they developed two bills. One bill expanded their cap and trade program, extended it, deepened it, amplified the climate ambition of it. And the other bill dealt directly with air pollution and other environmental challenges facing low-income communities and communities of color. And so what I think we're going to need to do at the federal level is have ideally a two-pronged approach. One that focuses like a laser beam on climate and does the most cost-effective, most fair, most efficient way to tackle that challenge. And another one, equally vigorous, that says, look, where is the pollution? What does our air quality monitor system say? The research suggests our air quality monitors are not fairly located, and they do exclude people who are historically disadvantaged. We need to work on that, and we need to make vigorous enforcement efforts. EPA, the states, everybody needs to, take these challenges seriously and engage in the social justice component of that. Okay, so that's the second thing I heard, but I think that's solvable. It's just going to take some work. It's going to take some money and some leadership. Okay, the third thing I keep hearing, and this again is on the progressive left, is that look how long it's taken us to get carbon pricing legislation, and we still haven't done it. And moreover, the climate challenge has gotten worse, and carbon pricing isn't sufficient, so therefore it's not necessary. Well, I think there are many sensible rejoinders to this concern. I do say that carbon pricing is not enough. Certainly, any carbon tax is only going to cover about 75% of our emissions inventory because there's about 25% where you just can't even measure exactly what the emissions are. You can't find an identifiable person responsible for it. So you're going to have to have separate policies for part of your greenhouse gas inventory. And these are things like agricultural methane and other land use issues, stuff like that. So that's fine. We're going to need more than one policy, but that doesn't mean that carbon pricing isn't incredibly important, arguably necessary for the vast majority of U.S. emissions. If you're going to say, okay, well, we're not going to get carbon pricing legislation through. We're going to do a clean electricity standard. Well, let's just think about that for a second. First of all, they're not environmentally equivalent at all. Clean electricity standard is for electricity. So what are you going to do about the rest of the emissions that we're responsible for? Buildings, industry, transportation. These are a growing share of our emissions already. So what's our policy? If all we pass is a clean electricity standard, we've still got 2/3 of our work or more to do. And so how heavy a political lift is it going to be to do all that? So you really can't compare an economy-wide carbon price with a policy that is clearly environmentally far inferior. Well, then the argument goes, okay, well, those other sectors are harder. So we're going to do research and development on those sectors. We're going to develop the technology, and then we're going to deploy that. Well, okay, but just remember that over 70% of research and development that's done in the United States is done by the private sector. So yes, push out federal R&D on clean energy, but if you don't mobilize the 70+% of R&D that's done each year in the United States, then you're leaving so much on the table ready to be deployed with market forces. And we're not going to do that if all we do is a clean electricity standard and federal spending on R&D. So those are the three things I've heard, and here those are some thoughts I would share. If I'm not convincing, what else might be on the path to convince the Biden administration to talk more, at least, about carbon pricing? And I want to go back to what other countries are saying. One thing that's happening is they're talking about border carbon adjusting our goods as they go into their countries. EU has announced it's going to start border adjusting their carbon price. That means tariffs on U.S. goods that go into the EU. Now, why are they doing that now? It's because their carbon price is getting to a serious level, and they don't want to disadvantage their industries. Likewise, Canada, they're talking about a carbon price going upwards of $50 a ton, perhaps more. That's a lot of trade with the United States. And so I'm kind of hoping that this talk, and now these countries don't want to create a trade war, but they're trying to solve a real problem. And so maybe discussion about tariffs against our products will start a new dialogue. And just in case you're interested in this, the Climate Leadership Council just put out a report that said that U.S. steelmakers are so much more carbon efficient than their competitors, including in China and in India, that if we did a border adjustment, we tax domestic emissions, but we also adjust foreign goods, then U.S. made steel would displace foreign steel because we're so much cleaner, and it would give our firms a competitive edge. Now, I don't think that's why we should do a carbon price with a border adjustment, because I'm worried about the climate and not tilting the table for trade. But if that gets industry at the table, I think it might pose an interesting opportunity. So I'm going to start there, and I would love your questions.
Okay, great. We have one question in the Q&A that's asking about if we can still maintain support for carbon fee and dividend if there was a policy that returned just 75% of the fees to citizens. As you know, CCL has usually argued for or advocated for 100% revenue return. So this person's asking, what do you think the support would be if there was a partial revenue return with money invested in other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are umpteen ways you could use the revenue that would keep the distribution of the impacts really fair, would not disadvantage lower income households, and would provide pro-growth opportunities for using the revenue and help grease the wheels of a deal in Congress. And in fact, if you check out RFF's carbon bill, or what it's called, carbon pricing bill tracker, and they'll show you that the legislation has all kinds of different uses of revenue. And maybe we could use some of it to expand the earned income tax credit, or help pay for infrastructure, or help burdened communities in coal-reliant areas. I mean, there are going to be any number of uses that I think would capture votes. And honestly, as long as we're not throwing that money down a rat hole and we're doing something reasonably fair and efficient with it, then I don't think we need to be too doctrinaire about exactly what formula that is, because it's the price signal that's going to do this really important work of reducing emissions and achieving our climate goals.
Great. We have one question about Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen's support for a carbon tax, and they're wondering about if she could be an influence on the administration's position on this.
You know, Janet's great. I worked for Janet when I was at the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and we got into climate together because that's when we were negotiating the Kyoto Protocol, and I helped her with the economic analysis of that agreement, both going into it and as we came out with the target that we did. Janet knows a lot about climate, and she's very concerned about it. She's talked about it a lot. And since she left the Fed and she was at Brookings, including at my lunch table, she talked about it a lot. I think now you're right that her influence is primarily internal, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the things I just talked about are things that she might have brought up within the administration. And I think she's terrific. And if ever there was a Treasury Secretary we could trust on these issues, it would be Janet.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think we are approaching the bottom of the hour, so I think that's all the questions that we can take for now. So I'll hand it back over to Mr.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Adele Morris. How great to see you again. Thank you for being a keynote for our conference again. Hopefully the next time we'll see you in person. Part of our strategy to get to the Obama administration is to provide overwhelming support in the Congress. You know, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act is approaching 70 sponsors, might have passed it already. And if everybody, I'd like you to keep your eyes peeled for an important bill coming out of the Senate that should address some environmental justice issues that have not been seen in carbon pricing bills before. Anyway, everybody, thank you for all the work that was put into today. I'm really proud of what happened. I hope as many as possible can join us. We have 4 independent sessions happening tomorrow, all starting at 1 o'clock East Coast time. And I hope that it works in your schedule to join us for another day. Those sessions are between 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Adele Morris, our other speakers today. And we'll see you all tomorrow, everybody. Bye now. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.